Yep.
Okay. So, good afternoon. It is afternoon. One of the things that we had scheduled when we started this last part of our course was that some of you would teach. And some of that's been kind of thrown out just because of having our inability to meet together. But Joseph offered to still teach his, and I said, well, of course I'll let you teach yours. So we're in the year 1830, and the personality that goes with 1830 is Andrew Jackson. So he's going to teach us a little bit today about Andrew Jackson, just so you get a little bit of a rough idea of the rest of the week. We're going to do Andrew Jackson today. And then tomorrow, instead of meeting like this, all of you have a Living Scripture subscription. And I'd like you to watch the video that I sent to you yesterday. I sent you the title of it. I always say it wrong, so I'm going to look it up again so that I give it to you the right way. So it is called The Prophet Joseph, More Than We Know. It's on your Living Scriptures subscription. It's one that's put together by the Joseph Smith Foundation. I did check with my daughter Jennifer because she has a subscription and I don't, but she says that that is on there and you can find it. So I highly recommend that you watch that tomorrow. We'll do a little bit more about Joseph Smith on Thursday. I'd love to share with you. There's about 3 or 4 patriarchal blessings of Joseph Smith on record. And some of the things that are in there are so amazing that I want to go through his patriarchal blessings a little bit on Thursday. And then we will also touch on the Constitution and the 5,000-year leap like we've been doing before. So I'm going to give Joseph however much time he needs to talk about Andrew Jackson.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Andrew Jackson was born in the backwoods of either North or South Carolina. We actually don't know which state he was born in.
Why?
I don't know. It just because of where
they were literally like across the street from each other, and so they don't know what side of the state line he was born on. It's kind of like Joseph Smith, where we don't know if he was born in Sharon County or Windsor County because that cabin actually
sits on
both lines. And so they say, well, maybe he was born in this corner, and that's why they said Sharon County because that corner was in Sharon County. So similarly, where he was born was literally, if you were on one side of the street, you were in North Carolina, and the other side was South Carolina. And so one of those two.
Both states claim him because they don't know.
They don't know.
He was born in 1767.
Got to work on your handwriting. I love you.
I love you too. His father died when he was 2, and by the age of 14, both of his brothers and his mother were also dead. Also at the age of 14, he was involved in a skirmish with the British at Hanging Rock. I believe it was North Carolina. I can't remember which one it was. But he was orphaned from a very young age. And he had some learning, but when he decided to take on a profession, at first he read law in Salisbury, and that's in North Carolina, and he...
Yep. Okay, so I think it might be easier if I just interject extra information.
Sure, go ahead.
So he read law in Salisbury.
I don't,
some of these words. Salisbury, North Carolina. But I want to talk a little bit about his time in the Revolutionary War, because he did sign up to be in the Revolutionary War, and he went in as a... what was it? He wasn't a regular soldier because he was only 14 years old.
Right.
And his other 2 brothers also joined at the same time. So one brother died in battle. The other brother and he were captured at the same time. And there's a story that's told. I think this gives you a very interesting view into Andrew Jackson. And that is that they were taken prisoner. They'd lost a battle. They were taken prisoner. And the captain over the British Army there took him and said, clean my boots. He had dirty boots from walking through the mud. He says, you're going to clean my boots. And he says, I know my rights as a prisoner of war, and you can't make me clean your boots. And so that captain actually took his sword and brought it down on Andrew Jackson. And so he actually suffered from the results of that injury for the rest of his life. But he knew his rights. He understood that it was not appropriate for that captain to force him to clean his boots just because he was a prisoner of war. He understood his rights, and he stood up for his rights. And I think that's a very important view into his character. He's the only member of his family born in the United States. His parents and his two brothers were Scotch-Irish immigrants. So he was the only one actually born in the United States. And the other brother and he both contracted smallpox shortly before they were released as prisoners of war. So when they got home, his mother got two of her sons back, but shortly after that, his brother died of the smallpox. And a short time after that, his mother died. So at the age of 14, he was in the Revolutionary War. And within that same year, he also lost both of his brothers and his mother. So at the age of 14, he's an orphan. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now it's said that he had from his grandfather back in Europe, he had an inheritance of about 300 pounds, which is supposedly a pretty significant amount of money. I don't understand their money back then, but that was supposedly a pretty significant inheritance. And he could have done a lot of things. He could have gone to school. He could have, bought land, bought a business. But I don't know. I hope that didn't take your picture away. My Cortana decided to turn on while I was talking. Weird. So unfortunately, he did not have the patriarchal influence of a father in his life. And he was given to weaknesses like cockfighting and gambling. And so most of his money was wasted away in those kinds of things. He did have some education, not a real formal education, but he was smart as a whip. So one of the things that's different then from now is that you could learn to be a lawyer simply by studying in a lawyer's office. And that is what he did. Now he was a character, no doubt about it. And so he was still doing the cockfighting. He still had debts from being a gambler, but he was very, very smart and was able to learn and to read for the law and to pass the bar at a pretty young age. And he was an excellent lawyer.
He was an outstanding lawyer.
Outstanding lawyer.
Very good at what he chose to do. And
remember that young boy who knew his rights, and I do not have to clean your boots. Okay?
Yeah.
He got it. So.
He was very outstanding as a lawyer and grew to be very popular among the people where he lived in Nashville.
Yes.
Except at the time it wasn't Tennessee. It was
a territory.
It was a territory of North Carolina, actually.
Right.
He there built himself an estate that he called the Hermitage.
Yep.
And somewhere along this time, he has also gotten married. I can't remember her name.
You can't remember her name. Let me find it while you keep talking.
Okay. She had been abandoned by her first husband, and they had assumed that he had filed a divorce.
Yeah, it was their belief that he had filed for divorce. Rachel Donaldson.
Yes, Rachel Donaldson. And it turns out that he didn't file for a divorce, which caused some...
It gave his opponents something to dig at him for later. Right. They accused him of adultery. But what did they do as soon as they found out that she actually wasn't divorced?
They fixed it as soon as they could.
Being a lawyer, he had the ability to help her with that divorce too.
Right.
So they did. They secured the divorce, and then they
got remarried.
Legally married again, because it wasn't a legal marriage the first time. She was actually the daughter of a woman who had a boarding house where he lived. So that is how he met her.
Okay.
Was that he stayed in the boarding house that her mother ran. And so that's how they met. And he loved her with everything in himself. Really, really did.
He also fought in the
Do you
war.
have anything more about them?
Well, there was the duel that happened because.
Let me just share a little bit more about them. One of the great sadnesses of their life was that they were never able to have children. That was a great sadness for them. They were able to rear some children of family members who had passed away. So they adopted the baby of a cousin who had passed away, a little boy, and they called him Andrew Jackson Jr. And so they raised him as their own. They also took other orphan children in from family members who'd passed away. And so they reared children, but she was never actually able to bear children. And that was a great sadness and sorrow for them. And at the end of his life, when he went back to the Hermitage to live, it was actually that adopted son and his family who stayed with him to help care for him and take care of him before he passed. So there was certainly the father and son feeling there, but they didn't have their own children.
Okay. There was once a man who, it says, an unjustified slur against Rachel.
Okay, remember that they thought they were married for real. What kind of a slur do you think he'd been making?
Probably something about being an adulterer.
Yeah.
And Andrew Jackson challenges this man to a duel.
Yeah. Some kind of a great slight to her honor.
Right.
And he was defending the honor of his wife.
Mm-hmm. He also got shot in the chest before he shot this man.
Right. So that man shot him first. He just wasn't very good aim. Andrew Jackson was slower, but he aimed better. And the other guy passed away. But he carried that bullet. And I don't know where in his chest, but somewhere where it didn't hit the heart, didn't hit the lungs. But he carried that bullet for the rest of his life. It was never removed.
just why keep it? Like
we don't understand because of the different medical things we have now. I mean, during the time between the Revolutionary War and Andrew Jackson's time as president is when they even discovered things like ether. Now, ether nobody would even use anymore, but that was a way that was the only way at that time they'd even found to anesthetize somebody so you could do such a surgery. Mm-hmm. So if you could live with the bullet, you lived with the bullet. You didn't go in and risk additional damage or infection. They didn't have antibiotics back then. They didn't necessarily know how to take care of an infection. And so you didn't risk additional infection if you didn't need to. The bullet went in, it didn't kill him, it healed over, and he kept the bullet. Today, we'd go into surgery and we'd remove as much as we can. However, we have soldiers walking around today, we have a friend that does, that they aren't able to remove all of the shrapnel from military battles. They go into such places where they can't get in safely to remove it, and it's safer for them to leave it than to take it out. So we still even have people today who walk around with metal in their bodies from military battles. So it's not unprecedented even today.
He fought in the War of 1812 and was sent to Florida to take care of some Indian skirmishes, I think it was.
Florida's later.
New Orleans.
Battle of New Orleans.
Yes.
And he led a local militia that was not well supported by the federal government. They had not provided provisions. They had not provided arms. Kind of sounds like George Washington for a second. They were not paying them the way they were supposed to be. And so he led them. He actually was told to disband that unit, officially told to disband it. And he said, you're not doing your job. So I am not disbanding my unit. But
he was actually voted to be the...
Wait, you didn't finish the Battle of New Orleans.
Okay, so he was
Battle
sent
of New
to
Orleans.
New Orleans, and
He won a very decisive battle against
yes,
the British.
he did.
A
But
very decisive battle that was 2 weeks after the peace treaty had been signed in Europe. Okay, so in America, they did not necessarily know where all the different troops and militia were. They didn't necessarily know the war was over. And so the British were still advancing too. It wasn't like the British were saying, wait, we've surrendered. They didn't. They were fighting. And so he did come home a war hero. They didn't
communication has advanced.
They didn't have the telegraph yet. They didn't have a telegraph yet, let alone a telephone or a cell phone or a computer or an email or any of those things. They had no way to communicate this. So a lot of times things did take a lot longer for the information to pass over to other people. So he won a very decisive battle and returned home a decorated war hero. Very well loved by the people because of that. And he was the kind of leader that he didn't expect his men to do something he wasn't willing to do. He led his troops. He didn't command from the back. And he was tough as nails. Whatever they had to suffer, he had to suffer. And because of his toughness, he got a nickname.
Old Hickory.
Old Hickory. Hickory is a hard wood. And so they gave him that name. And it was a loving nickname. It was not it's not behind his back, man, that guy is hard as hickory. It wasn't that. It was a very, it was out of love and respect for him as a commander. And he didn't kowtow to his people at all. He expected hard things of them, but he expected hard things of himself as well. And so he earned the nickname Old Hickory because he was just tough. He was tough and hard.
But he was voted a commander in that local militia in Nashville. And he actually went back to the Hermitage to relax a little bit, and then the War of 1812 broke out, and he went to New Orleans and took care of that.
And he won one of his appointments over a man who was 30 years older than him.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was recognized by the people for his accomplishments. Now, the Florida thing did happen.
Yes.
Can we talk about that a little bit? He got in trouble for that one.
Right, but he misinterpreted orders. There were some Indian skirmishes, and he hung 2 Brits on the wrong side of the border,
who were encouraging the Indians to attack. Remember, Florida at the time was under Spanish rule.
Right.
It's not yet American.
And John Quincy Adams, wasn't he president at this time, was one of the men who stood up for Jackson when he messed up.
Right. And he was actually made, at least for a time, I don't know if it was governor or something of Florida. But the people there didn't like him, and he didn't like them. And he didn't like Florida. So he resigned, and he went back to his home at the Hermitage. So he wasn't afraid to say, this just isn't working for anybody. Let's just... He didn't hold on to power just because he had power. He could have said, well, I'm the governor and I don't care. It's like, this isn't working. You don't like me. I don't like you. I don't like being here. I want to go back where I came from. There's a huge difference between North Carolina and Florida, too. So if that's the kind of even land and environment you're used to, and the weather, would be different between the two. And the crocodiles and alligators, I mean, really.
I'm going back home. There's giant lizards. I don't like them.
Quick science lesson. Florida is the only place in the world that has both crocodiles and alligators. Both. Okay, now a crocodile, this is science lesson. This is not history anymore. Crocodile has a more pointy snout, and the alligator has the more, if I can make them look different, has a more rounded snout. And I can't remember which, but one of them is suited to salt water and one is fresh water. That's why they can have both, because of those marshes that are somewhat salty and somewhat fresh water. That's where the saltwater one lives. The ones who are not saltwater that need fresh water, I wish I could remember alligator or crocodile. It's been a couple of years since I taught that. But that's why they can both live in Florida. Only place in the world where you have both alligators and crocodiles. You don't have to like them. You do not have to like alligators or crocodiles. It is just a very, very fascinating fact. They're enormous.
They are ginormous.
They're enormous. I once watched a video and it was like, did I watch this with you guys or tell you about it later?
You might have told us about it later.
So it was an alligator or a crocodile against one of those big, huge snakes, the kind like a boa constrictor or a python, the kind that squeezes its prey.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And they were battling for hours. So you don't have to worry about the crocodile when he's having a battle with a snake, right?
Right.
So somebody's standing there on the shore taking video of this battle between the crocodile and I think it was a constrictor. And you know who won?
Crocodile?
No.
Oh. Okay.
The constrictor. They have the ability to unlock this hinge in their jaw and just whoop. And so it swallowed the alligator whole. And within the body of the snake, you could see the feet of the alligator. I'm sure it took years. I mean, I don't think that constrictor had to eat for a long time because they don't chew and swallow their food. Literally, it gets broken down and absorbed inside their bodies. I think it was a long time before that constrictor had to have another meal.
I wonder how long before the
and they go hide.
Like passed out,
they go hide someplace when they're like that.
Right, because they can't even.
They have no defense at that
Could
point.
it
Right?
even move?
It did move. It was kind of funny looking. I should see if we could find that footage. It was really fascinating. Anyway, I don't want to mess with either an alligator or a constrictor.
Me either, because they're
Or
big
a
giant lizards
python.
that can eat me.
Wow.
So.
I mean, they can eat goats too. My voice teacher talked about how the pythons would eat goats because he grew up in South Africa.
Okay.
Yeah, his dad was a doctor for the British. Anyway, it's amazing. So I can see why you would like to live in Florida.
I don't like Florida. You have big giant lizards that can eat me whole. Let's go
And the
home.
people aren't very nice. Anyway, I don't know. He just didn't get along super well with the people.
But because of his popularity, he was encouraged to run for presidency.
Oh, wait, don't skip too much yet. He was the first senator for his state.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
He did a lot. So he had been made the counselor for his territory, which is a lawyer type of a position. He's been a judge.
Right, he was a judge for a while too.
Yeah, for the not the Supreme Court, but the main court for the state of North Carolina, I think. And so he'd had a lot of political roles, and he was very popular with the people because he stood for the people and their rights and their privileges. He didn't come from money, kind of a self-made man. I mean, he had some habits through the end of his life that you and I would shudder at. We really would. One of the things that we found, and you guys will find this too, even when you read in the manual about Andrew Jackson, is he's kind of a tough character to figure out. One of the things that I kept holding on to while I was studying is he is one of those eminent men that appeared to Wilford Woodruff in the St. George Temple for his work to be done.
So it must have done something.
So there's
good.
definitely something redeeming about him. But I believe, and I couldn't prove this, but it's very, very possible that like the other founding fathers, his history has been written in such a way to make him look like a scoundrel who happened to do a couple of good things. And even sometimes they call that into question. So I just, the Lord wouldn't send him if he didn't have some redeeming.
Right.
And so I would have to say, and I wish that he'd written an autobiography. I was just looking for that before we started today. He does not have an autobiography. That would tell us a whole lot about him. But he may not have kept any kind of papers to really tell us about his life. And so we don't have any of that. But I want you to hold on to that thought as you study him, because almost everybody writes about him in somewhat derogatory of a tone. Almost everybody. And that seems a little bit odd to me. That makes me question some of what's told about him. But he did have some rough edges. Duels were not unknown to him because he was a man who believed in sustaining honor. And he wasn't shy about it. And maybe he was a little bit too gruff. I don't know. but I just try to hold in reserve any kind of judgment because I know that he appeared and had his work done in the temple.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
So because of his popularity, he's encouraged to run for the presidency.
Right.
And he wins.
Not the first time.
Not the first time.
Not the first time.
You mean he won twice?
He did.
Oh.
He won the second time.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know more than I do. Maybe I should have studied this a little more.
I read 1 or 2 more articles than you did.
True.
I went looking for as much. Okay, so here's an important thing as we're studying these types of things. You know, we've got our manual here and there's a few articles in there, but it's what, 2 pages about Andrew Jackson?
Yeah.
How can you sum somebody's life up in 2 pages? How can you even sum up their presidency in 2 pages? You really can't. And so one of the things that a historian would do is a historian would look for as much information as possible. Now, I do not know where I would find original documents on Andrew Jackson. I'm not sure where I would find anything like that. But if as close as you can get to original documents as possible, but at the very least, read as much as you can and try to keep your mind open and remember some of the important facts, like he appeared to Wilford Woodruff. So we know that the Lord deemed him worthy to have his temple work done, which means that his wife also would have had hers done and they would have been sealed because that was part of what they were doing. All of the men who go through the temple, if you were to go now, you would first be ordained an elder. Obviously, they didn't have that opportunity. They didn't have the gospel at all. So prior to going through to take care of their endowments, baptism, confirmation, and then there's also a priesthood ordination for all of those men to the high priesthood as an elder, usually.
Well, there were a couple there who got ordained.
There were 5 ordained to high priest. High priest indicates that there was some bigger work that they did. George Washington is one of them. I can't remember all of them now, but 5 of them were actually ordained high priests, which means that the work that they did had specific, important mission-like things. So Andrew Jackson would have been ordained an elder.
Right.
Okay, so keeping that in mind as you're reading all of these things, you have to keep in the back of your mind, is there something right with this guy? There is something right with this man, or he wouldn't have appeared to Wilford Woodruff. So when I read all of this negative stuff about him, I just don't think his story is being told right. I just don't. So we're going to give you the best we have. The Lord is his judge, but remember that he appeared. That's important.
Right.
Go ahead.
So he won his second try of getting to the president, and after his inaugural address, he gets on his horse and goes to the White House. Now, a short while before he was elected, his wife dies. So his niece was, how do I say this, the lady of the White House?
She was the hostess. So any official state things that he had to do, or it was a dinner or some kind of a social gathering, she was the hostess for all of those things. That would normally be the role of the first lady, to make sure that those things were taken care of, and those things are important. I don't want you to think that all the women do is plan the parties. No, they make sure that everything is arranged in such a way that the important conversations can happen that need to happen. And the women gather together and they have conversations and they have a lot of influence on each other. So she played that role. He actually entered the White House a grieving man. He was very, very recently made a widower before he went into the White House. Very, very sad, actually.
But a whole throng, a huge crowd follow him to the White House. And a little bit of a ruckus happened. They had broken china, torn drapes, and Andrew Jackson escaped the throng by climbing out a window.
All right, I didn't read that part of the story. Is that in here?
I believe it was actually in the other encyclopedia.
Oh, okay. I didn't read everything in that one. Okay. See?
Like they even like instead of, I'm sure he was greeting everybody as they were coming in.
Mhm.
They like pushed him aside even as they were coming in through the door. So
Interesting. Now you'd never see that at the White House now, would you?
no.
Too many armed guards. Okay.
But one of the things he was very. How do I say this? It wasn't hard-headed. He was very stubborn in his thinking.
He's
I
very
guess.
determined. And he had very set ideas.
Yes. Congress didn't like him very much.
No, why?
I know that he got rid of the second bank of the U.S.
The second what?
Bank. Oh yeah.
Okay, now remember this credo. He who rules best rules least. He didn't think everything that came through the Congress was good. He vetoed almost everything. Almost everything.
Vetoed every bill
But one.
but one.
Yep. Every bill that came across his desk in 8 years. And they didn't put as many through back then as we push through now. We're in way too big of a hurry to change our Constitution.
Right.
Every single one that came across his desk, he vetoed. But let's talk about the bank. I think this is probably one of the very important reasons why he would have appeared in the St. George Temple.
So
What do you know about the bank?
I know that it was pretty much a government-run monopoly.
Not government run,
Well,
private entity.
okay,
Yeah,
it was private entity, but
not good.
not good. And he didn't like it. And two senators, it was, who were they? It was, their last names were Clay and Webster.
Yeah, and they were not bad guys.
They weren't bad guys, but they were pushing this bill to have this bank rechartered. And Andrew Jackson, when he found that they were still pushing for this bill to come through, he says it was to Martin Van Buren, who was the president after he was.
His pick, too.
His pick, right. He said to Van Buren, "The bank is out to kill me, but I will kill it." Something.
And he did.
And he did. And so he vetoes that bill to recharter the bank. And I lost my train of thought.
He vetoes the bill.
Yeah. And he like they didn't like that.
The bank didn't, that's for sure.
Congress.
Congress didn't.
Yeah. Congress actually voted on it again. Actually, almost all of them voted on Jackson's side of it. They're like, you know what? Let's put this to rest. No.
They were unable to override his veto.
Mhm.
Exactly. All right, so this is super important. Really super important. When we've studied the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, first paragraph, it gives Congress, and it gives the United States government, the Congress, the ability to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, and to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. They were able to collect taxes.
Mhm.
Fifth paragraph, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and foreign coin, and fix standards of weights and measures. Coin money, not print money. What's supposed to be our standard?
Gold and silver.
Gold. We're supposed to be on the gold standard. And a central bank is not owned by the United States.
Mm-mm.
It's owned by a private entity who happens to run the financial affairs of the federal government. Does that sound like a good idea?
Nope.
No, it puts a lot of power into private money and investors who have a lot of money. It gives a lot of power to people who have a lot of money. Does that take care of the common people? No. Does that help with the general welfare of the nation? No, it doesn't. And so this is the second bank. Let's talk about it a little bit, because this federal bank was warned about from both Jefferson as well as Madison, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, two founding fathers who felt that it was completely unconstitutional and gave a warning against it. And let's see if I can find it. So Alexander Hamilton initially, when the Constitution was being written, was against a central bank.
Mm-hmm.
When he became the Secretary of the Treasury, he changed his mind. He felt like the government didn't need to be that limited. And he pushed for this idea of having a central bank. Now, something you need to know about the history of the United States, when they were sitting in Philadelphia and they were having their constitutional convention, which was not supposed to be happening.
Nope.
When they're having that convention, they're talking about what do we need to do to make us solvent. Solvent meaning able to pay our bills, because there was a lot of debt. There's a lot of war debt. They owed money to many countries, especially France, because of their help in the war. The federal government owed money. The state governments owed money. Okay? And it's important to note that, let me find all my bookmarks here, because what they agreed to do with this was to pay all their debts, to make all debts, whether they had been incurred by the federal or the state governments, federal debts. Now, that isn't usually how things are done in Europe. When you reconfigure your government, you just say, oh, those debts were the old government and they don't belong to us and we're not going to pay them. Yeah. But here's America, brand new country. They need the foreign nations to take them seriously. They need to be able to trade with those nations. They need to be able to have their money have value. And so very wisely, nobody's ever done this before. This is not the European aristocratic way. They decide to go ahead and pay all debts, fulfill all obligations. So when it talks about all debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be valid against the United States under this Constitution as under the Articles of Confederation. We're not trying to get out of our debts. And so Alexander Hamilton, who was the first Secretary of the Treasury, said the debt of the federal government is $11,710,387 owed to foreign banks, primarily France and Holland. 42 million more was owed to banks and contractors in the United States. The states themselves owed about $25 million for expenditures in the common defense. And all of this added up to $79 million. Now that's a lot of money today. And we're in the, trillions now with our federal deficit? So we had a federal deficit of $79 million. All right. So here we go. We're trying to figure out how to take care of this. And this was a surprise to all creditors, because they just expected that they just wouldn't pay their debts. I have another one somewhere here. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay. And that gave them a lot of credit in the eyes of the nations. Now, Also, they believed everything should be paid with currency backed by metal, precious metals. They recognized that if you're off on your way to buy a large purchase, a home, whatever, right? Probably carrying around that much gold was not practical, smart, safe. Let me carry around my $100,000 of gold, right?
No.
And so they allowed for the printing of paper money if it could be exchanged ounce for ounce for the gold or whatever precious metal backed it. Specifically gold. Gold is the currency that's the best, right? And so they allowed banks to issue it if it could be redeemed in gold or silver. Over the objections of Jefferson and Madison, Alexander Hamilton persuaded Congress to approve a United States bank for a period of 20 years. Okay, so it was supposed to be short term. Madison and Jefferson still thought it was a really bad idea.
It was.
But it functioned, it was a private bank. It functioned as a place for a deposit for United States taxes. It also issued redeemable banknotes, just like other banks did. By 1798, Hamilton decided that this procedure was a mistake because he felt like if currency or banknotes were to be issued and circulated as money, it should have been done by Congress. And he's right. Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5. One of the powers of Congress is to coin money. All right, so they'd given away a power of Congress. So even Alexander Hamilton came around to realize that was a mistake to give that kind of power. Does the United States have to have a bank? Yeah, we have to have a place to put things. But should we put in the hands of a private corporation the power over our money system? No. Okay, so the reason a second United States bank happened was because by 1816, we're having a hard time paying our debts from the War of 1812. So Congress again makes a second bank. 20 years still. And it is set to end in 1836. That's at the end of Andrew Jackson's first presidency. He vetoes the bill to re-up this bank in an election year. Do you realize the danger of doing that in an election year? If it was a bad idea and the people don't like it and it gets spun wrong, you aren't getting reelected.
Except he was still reelected.
And he took that to mean the people agree with me. This is a bad idea. So he vetoes that bill. And as you said, Congress could not overturn that veto. Remember, a veto has to be overturned by a two-thirds majority. Hard to get. Not a simple majority. Usually they just need a simple majority, but a two-thirds majority, 67%, had to happen for that veto to be overrun. And when it came back around, many of the senators and representatives recognized he's actually right.
Yeah.
And voted the same way that he had vetoed. So it really was held well. Another thing that Jackson is well known for financially, and I just wanted to bring this out too, like Thomas Jefferson, he and Thomas Jefferson were the two most successful presidents in handling taxes. The two most successful presidents in handling, and Andrew Jackson. Wow. Okay. Jefferson was determined to keep the cost of the federal government within available revenue coming in from imports. There was no direct tax at that time. You didn't pay income tax every year. The only taxes were indirect. Imports are taxed. That cost gets passed along to the end user, usually the consumer, which that's okay. It's just a part of the price of doing business. Indirect taxes, but no direct taxes. There was no federal income tax. It wasn't supposed to be. And if it ever did happen, it was supposed to be very short term. And it could only be put on the people by population. So you didn't have a bigger tax for the state of New York that has a lot more people than for the state of Montana that has a lot less. It was based on the number of people that lived in the state. So the exact same amount per person required of the state. Okay. So he was determined to keep all of the revenue coming in from imports. That's the budget we have. We can't go above it. And he prevailed in having taxes repealed, excise taxes, the internal revenue system. And one of the things he did was he began selling off half public lands. He was able to pay off half of that debt during his presidency by the sale of public lands. Remember, the only reason the federal government is supposed to own land is for the erecting of forts or other military establishments. It's the only reason they're supposed to own land at all.
So
all these state parks out here,
shouldn't-
national park, they shouldn't be owned by the federal government. So Andrew Jackson does a similar thing. Okay, he looked to how President Jefferson handled things, and he did this very similarly. He sold public lands until he had paid off completely the national debt and had a substantial surplus. He had more than we needed. He returned $28 million to the states.
Wow.
$28 million returned to the states. What do you think of Andrew Jackson now?
He knew what he was doing.
I would venture to say that we could use that same policy now to get rid of our national debts. Sell off the public lands that you shouldn't own anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to stop getting into more debt. You have to stop thinking that general welfare means that you take care of this guy over here whose house burned down or who's out of a job. That's not the federal government's job. Andrew Jackson got that. He got that. Okay, and we'll talk more about that on the next thing you're about to bring out, I'm sure. Nullification. Did you get that or understand it?
Mm-mm.
Okay, I'm going to go into nullification then.
Okay.
These are the two things that really marked his presidency. One, he got rid of this bank. Well, actually, three. He got rid of the entire national debt and had a substantial surplus so that $28 million are returned to the states. Third thing, when you read in the Doctrine and Covenants that a war might start because of what's going on in South Carolina.
Oh, I did read that, but it was
You didn't understand what it was. It's okay. So there were some pretty hefty.
That's
No. It's money. Taxes, for lack of a better word, being passed on to the states. And of course, the whole abolition thing is coming out. What did the founding fathers want? They wanted slavery to end in 20 years from the time of the Constitution, North and South. It wasn't some of the founding fathers who wanted slavery to end. Even those in the South who were practicing slavery, remember it was put upon them by the banks in England. Now they don't know how to run it without their slaves. And to turn a slave free without the ability to provide for themselves, when they couldn't read, they couldn't write, most often they didn't have land, they didn't have a way of providing, that actually would have been very, very cruel. It needed to be done in an orderly fashion. So they had set it up in such a way that within 20 years, slavery would just naturally end. It would just naturally end. But we get the cotton gin in 1793. It's cotton gin because actually was not, it wasn't really even financially helpful to have slaves.
Until the cotton gin.
The cotton gin made it really easy to get those seeds out of the cotton because it pulled it out. So instead of a slave having to go like this all day long getting seeds out, turn a crank, all the seeds fall on the bottom, the cotton goes over here. You just took away the jobs of how many people, right? Now slavery becomes a little bit more financially viable, where it wasn't before. So things happened that made it so we were not abolishing slavery the way we were supposed to. So those in the northern states, that's a more industrial portion of the United States. Southern states are still highly a slave states. And this abolition thing going back and forth. So they kept saying, well, those fees and duties that you're putting on us down here are more beneficial to the factories and industrial things going up in the north. You're against us because of slavery. So they really did keep arguing about this is because of slavery, this is because of slavery. This, if they just abolished it in the first place, would have been no issue, right? But they didn't have it abolished. And so there were some fees being placed. And South Carolina said, we don't agree to it. We do not agree to those fees. We will not pay them. That law is null in the state of South Carolina.
What does null mean?
Void, not of effect. We will not pay those fees that you're imposing. Andrew Jackson said, you don't have the right to do that. Under the federal constitution, you don't have the right.
Calhoun, he talked to
John C. Calhoun.
Mm-hmm. I remember reading that there were also some private threats to hang him for treason because he was like leading the charge, I guess, for South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. So it was called nullification and seceding, meaning trying to leave the United States. Did they have the right to leave the United States? No. He didn't read it that way. Abraham Lincoln didn't read it that way. You do not have the right to say, I'm no longer a member of the United States of America. So you don't have the right to nullify, you don't have the right to secede. But one of the things that was extremely important is that the federal government was not supposed to promote the welfare of individuals. General welfare means it should benefit the entire United States, not a particular state, not a particular group of people, not a particular person or company. General welfare is the entire United States. So they were to build postal roads so that the post office could get about and deliver the mail. One of the things that he did that was a kind of interesting is he said, you don't have the right to not pay those fees. You don't have the right to make it null. You don't have the right to secede. However, I'm going to veto this bill for this road that's supposed to be built that isn't actually for the general welfare. And he eased the amount of this particular tariff and fee on the people. He said, you don't have the right to do this. And he held the Union together at a very important time because this was rocking the whole United States. And the other nations, we're not that far into being our own nation, 40 years since the Constitution was put into place. So the other nations are still just kind of waiting. And the War of 1812 just barely finished.
Yeah.
And that was, England coming back trying to take us again. And so there's still other nations waiting in the wings, waiting for us to fail so they can come in and just take over. We've made a lot of improvements here. I'd love to just come and scoop all that up, right? Mm-hmm. So he held the United States together. Okay. Anything else you wanted to add about Andrew Jackson?
He really liked Martin Van Buren.
He did. Martin Van Buren did not appear to Wilford Woodruff.
Nope.
Do you know why?
He refused to help Joseph in his legally owned properties
Yes.
in Missouri.
When Joseph and others of the brethren went to Washington, D.C. to try to get our rights taken care of because the states were not upholding those rights, they did have audience with Martin Van Buren, the president, and he said, "Your cause is just, but I can do nothing for you." He did not appear to Wilford Woodruff. He did not. So, does that mean Martin Van Buren was a bad person for Andrew Jackson to stand behind? I don't know. Sometimes people change when they get into office and the power goes to their head. I would bet that Andrew Jackson, who was always on the side of the small guy, would have said, "What? That's not right," right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But he did appear to Wilford Woodruff, and Martin Van Buren did not. Anything else?
He died after retiring as president and giving office over to Van Buren.
Martin Van Buren becoming the next president. Yeah.
And he went home, and as you said, he was taken care of by his adopted son, Andrew Jackson Jr.
Do you have written down anywhere the years of his presidency?
No, I
You
do
don't?
not.
Is it in here?
Don't think so.
I think it's not. Okay. Probably not super important. I'll do a quick Google search. Sometimes it's very helpful.
But he died in the year 1845.
He did. He died actually a year after Joseph Smith died in June. So almost literally a year later. He was the president of the United States, 7th president of the United States from the years 1829 to 1837. So I don't know how he would have responded to Joseph Smith. I would like to think that he would have helped in any way that he could, just given the nature of this particular man. But he died. When were they expelled? 6. He was no longer really the president when all this came about, right?
Right.
And
When
so
did he die?
1845, June 1845. So that is Andrew Jackson. Tomorrow, please watch the Joseph Smith movie. Thursday, we'll talk more about Joseph Smith and some other factors in this era, because whenever the Lord raises up a good thing, whether it's a man or an institution, Satan always puts forth his counterfeit. So with a true prophet and the restoration, we have antichrists who come in this same general generation. And we'll talk a little bit about that, just so we have an idea of how Satan really does fight against the good. So we'll see you all in 2 days. Enjoy the Joseph Smith Foundation movie. I think you'll really enjoy the information that they share. It'll get you to thinking. Okay? All right. Till tomorrow or till Thursday. See you then.